Hey guys, tonight, we're slipping quietly back through the folds of time, easing past candle-lit corridors of memory, until we find ourselves stepping into the vaulted great hall of a medieval castle. The air is warm with the mingling scents of roasting meat, spiced wine, beeswax candles, and damp rushes underfoot. Outside, the night is cold and damp, the sort that seeps into your bones. But in here, this cavernous hall, there's a glow, a hum, a sense of expectation as servants scurry to and fro. You're about to dine at a glorious medieval feast, the kind sung about in ballads and etched into illuminated manuscripts. But beware between the strange dishes, the unwashed hands of your fellow guests, and the questionable wine. You probably won't survive this if you're squeamish. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you are right now and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The flicker of torches makes the carved beams above seem alive, writhing with shadowy griffins and twisted vines. You find your place at a long trestle table stretching nearly the length of the hall. The Lord's seat is elevated at the far end, beneath a canopy of rich tapestry, an unmistakable sign of his authority. The wooden benches are crowded already with minor nobles, visiting knights, well-to-do merchants, all eager for the spectacle to begin. At your feet, the rushes sweetened with herbs to disguise the faint odor of centuries of spilled ale and grease rustle as hounds nose their way through hoping for scraps. The servants' movements are a silent choreography. One adjusts the heavy salt cellar at the head of the table. Another lays trenchers, thick slabs of stale bread that will serve as your plate. No forks tonight. Your fingers are your tools, and a goodly share of the meal will soak into the bread beneath your food. That bread, now mingled with juices and gravies, will later be given to the poor at the castle gate, or perhaps to the dogs if you're feeling less charitable. The herald, resplendent in the Lord's colors, raises a trumpet. A brassy note cuts through the warm murmur of voices, and the great doors at the far end swing open. The first course is on its way, not a single plate at a time, but in a parade of spectacle and scent. Servants bear platters of steaming pottage, deep bowls of thick broth rich with barley root vegetables, and perhaps a scrap or two of venison. The scent of pepper and cinnamon drifts from the kitchen, a reminder that spices, dear and precious, are a sign of wealth here. You dip your spoon and taste the deep earthiness of parsnip and leek softened with cream and sharpened by the faintest hint of ginger. Conversation swells around you. A knight boasts of a hunt in the nearby forest, describing the size of the stag with gestures grand enough to threaten the candles. Across from you, a merchant unfurls a scrap of foreign silk to impress his neighbor, its crimson threads catching the light like molten gold. Every few minutes, a servant refills cups with spiced wine, the heat of it seeping into you like a comfort against the night. You notice how often the cup is shared, passed from hand to hand with little thought for cleanliness. Germs are not yet part of the medieval mind. A sudden commotion rises from the far end of the hall, the arrival of the boar's head borne aloft on a silver platter. Its mouth is stuffed with an apple, its tusks polished to a gleam, its hide lacquered with a glaze of honey and mustard. This is no mere dish, it is the centerpiece of honor, a herald of plenty, and a symbol of the host's ability to provide the very best. A low hum of admiration runs through the crowd as the Lord's carver, a man with practiced precision, begins slicing thin portions for the high table. You can hear the crackle of the skin under his blade. Between each course, the minstrels strike up a tune. A lute plucks a merry rhythm, while a small drum marks the pace. A man in a motley coat, a jester, flits between the tables, tossing out quips and leaping into pratfalls to coax laughter from the guests. Even you find yourself smiling at his antics, though you suspect he's far more shrewd than he pretends. The jester is the one man in the hall who can poke fun at the Lord without fear, at least until his wit cuts too close. The next platters arrive, roasted fowl, perhaps swan or peacock, redressed in their own shimmering feathers for the sheer show of it. The meat is tender, flavored with a sweet glaze of honey and cloves. A dish of pike in rich green sauce follows the tang of parsley and vinegar, sharp against the richness of the fish. In the center of the table stands a great marchpane, a confection of almond paste shaped into a castle, complete with tiny banners and sugared battlements. Your fingers are sticky with sweetness before you realize you've broken off more than your share of a turret. Beneath the pageantry, you sense the undercurrent of politics and alliances being forged. A noble leans close to the merchant to whisper of a shipment due at port. A visiting knight listens intently as the steward hints at land for sale. The feast is as much about who you speak to and what is promised as it is about the food. In this hall, every toast carries a weight. Every shared dish seals a small bond, and so the first course gives way to the second. The candles burning lower as the air grows thicker with the mingled perfume of meat, spice, wax, and wine. You lean back a little, feeling the press of bodies on either side, the warmth of the fire from the great hearth, the hum of voices that rise and fall like waves on a sheltered shore. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you realize you are slipping deeper into this world, a world of bright banners, shadowed stone, and endless appetite. The servants clear the trenchers heavy now with the remains of meat and gravy and bring fresh bread for the next round. You glance toward the kitchen doors where the glow of the fire spills into the hall, hinting at the labors within. Soon more wonders will appear. From the kitchen's yawning mouth, the procession begins again. You see shadows flicker against the wall as servants carry in gleaming platters, more delicate dishes, this time meant to intrigue rather than overwhelm. A pair of them bear a pie so vast that it takes both to keep it steady, its golden crust adorned with pastry flowers and vines. When the steward slices into it, the scent of spiced hair mingles with that of figs and dates, a rich perfume that pulls you forward without thought. The pie is shared in generous wedges, its filling dense with tender meat and sweet fruit, all bound together by a sauce that tastes faintly of wine and pepper. You take your portion on a fresh trencher, the crust still warm against your fingers, and the sweetness of the fruit seeps into the savory juices. The combination is unlike anything you've tasted before, foreign, decadent, unapologetically rich. Somewhere in your mind, you imagine the journey those spices made from the Levant, across treacherous seas, through busy ports, and finally into this kitchen. Each bite is a small fortune. Beside the pie come small fritters, their crisp shells dusted with sugar, and bowls of almond milk, custard flecked with rosewater. The sweetness offers a pause from the heavy meats, though you know more is coming. Already servants are whispering instructions to one another, readying the next marvel. Across the table, a minor noble gestures with a drumstick as he tells of a skirmish on the borderlands, his voice rising over the minstrel's tune. His neighbor, a lady in a gown of deep blue wool, nods politely, though her eyes wander toward the high table where the Lord's youngest daughter sits, her hair catching the candlelight. Gossip swirls as freely as the wine here. Alliances and flirtations begin and end between bites. At the far side of the hall, a group of visiting clerics huddle together, speaking in low Latin. They are served the same dishes as the others, but their portions are smaller, their cups refilled with watered wine rather than the potent, spiced variety. Even in the bounty of the feast, rank and role shape the experience. You notice, too, how carefully the servants manage these distinctions, an unspoken language of where to place each platter, whose cup is filled first, and who must wait. Another flourish of trumpet, and the entertainment changes. A pair of acrobats enters their tunics, bright as jewel box lids, their limbs moving with improbable grace. They tumble, leap, and twist between the trestle tables, earning bursts of applause and the occasional coin tossed their way. The jester joins in balancing a trencher on his head, while making mock bows to the high table. Laughter rolls through the hall, and for a moment the formality softens. The next course arrives, whole roasted quail, delicate and glistening, each presented on a small round of toasted bread. They are followed by bowls of eel stew, the fish stewed in wine and leeks, its aroma rich but strangely earthy. A dish of lampreys appears slippery dark and glistening with a sauce thickened by blood and spice. You hesitate, watching others dig in without a second thought, their fingers slick as they pick the meat from the bones. In this hall, refusing a dish is a breach of courtesy, so you take a cautious bite. The flavor is intense, metallic at first, then mellowed by the spice. It's not something you would seek out again, but it earns you a nod from your neighbor. Between each bite, your gaze is drawn to the banners hanging along the walls, bright heraldry in gold crimson and deep green. Each tells a story, a lineage, a victory, a claim to land or title. In the shifting torchlight, the embroidered beasts seem to stir and breathe a silent audience to the revelry. You imagine the hall without its feast day splendor, cold, dim, the stone echoing with footsteps, and the hiss of the wind through arrow slits. Tonight, though, it is a living thing, warm with light and laughter. The herald calls for a toast. Cups are raised, the Lord's name spoken with respect, and perhaps a touch of calculated flattery. You join in, feeling the heat of the spiced wine coat your throat. There's a cheer, and the sound bounces off the rafters, mingling with the minstrel's bright refrain. The dogs beneath the table bark, sensing the excitement, tails thumping against the rushes. From the kitchen comes another marvel, a towering subtlety, a sugar sculpture shaped into the form of a knight, astride a rearing horse, its armor picked out in silver leaf. The horse's mane crafted from spun sugar, threads so fine they shiver in the air. This is no food for eating. It is a display of wealth and skill meant to astonish the guests and remind them of the Lord's reach. You watch as the servants set it near the high table, and a murmur of admiration runs through the hall. While the sculpture holds the eye, the real work continues. Platters of beef roasted in ale, garnished with onions and sprigs of rosemary. Bowls of peas stewed with mint. Loaves of crusty bread passed hand to hand. You tear off a hunk, dipping it into the rich gravy pooling on your trencher. The meat melts in your mouth, tender from long hours over the fire. Somewhere behind you, a heated debate breaks out over the merits of hunting hounds versus hawks for sport. The voices rise, then fade into laughter, as someone produces a jug of mead to settle the matter. This is the rhythm of the feast conversation, performance, food, and drink weaving together into a single tapestry of sound and sensation. The air grows thicker now, warm with breath and smoke. Candles gutter as the night deepens, and still the servants come with fresh dishes. You realize that pacing yourself is essential. The feast may go on for hours yet. Even so, the lure of the next bite, the next surprise from the kitchen keeps you leaning forward. The herald gives another signal, and the minstrels take up a slower tune. This, you suspect, is the lead-in to something grand. Guests shift on their benches, cups are refilled, and a hush settles over the tables nearest the high seat. Whatever is coming will be worth the wait. From the shadows near the great hearth, a cluster of servants emerges, moving as one, each bearing a piece of an enormous, glistening creation. They advance slowly, careful not to jostle, their faces tight with concentration. At their center is the marvel itself, a roasted peacock, resplendent in its iridescent plumage, the skin beneath burnished to a deep golden brown. The bird has been cooked, cooled, and then redressed in its own feathers so that it appears as if it might at any moment ruffle its tail and let out a haunting cry. A murmur ripples through the hall. This is no mere dish, it is the pinnacle of display, dining the embodiment of wealth and extravagance. You recall hearing that such birds were sometimes basted with a mixture of egg yolk and saffron, to deepen the color of the skin, the better to contrast with the shimmering blues and greens of the plumage. At the high table, the Lord leans forward clearly, pleased with the gasps and applause. The peacock is set before him, and the carver steps forward with the precision of a surgeon. Thin slices are offered first to the highest-ranking guests, then slowly, reluctantly down the ranks. You accept your portion laid on a fresh trencher with a small mound of spiced bread stuffing. The meat is rich, darker than chicken, with a subtle, gamey tang. The stuffing, redolent of cinnamon and cloves, tempers the flavor, and you can almost forget the theatricality of the presentation. Almost. Across from you, someone is whispering that the Lord's cook once prepared a similar bird that breathed fire thanks to a clever trick involving alcohol and a concealed tube. You half believe it. As the peacock is savored, the music shifts to something stately, and a pair of dancers in flowing sleeves glides into the open space before the high table. Their movements are measured and graceful hands weaving in patterns that catch the candlelight. The guests fall into a reverent silence broken only by the soft pluck of the lute and the low sigh of a fiddle. You feel the rhythm pulse through the air, a steady heartbeat beneath the chatter and the clink of cups. Servants move between the tables again, clearing emptied trenchers and replacing them with small wooden boards. Upon these, they place delicate slices of cheese, sharp and tangy, alongside clusters of grapes and figs. A jug of pale, slightly cloudy cider makes its way down your end of the table, the crisp scent of apple rising from the cup as you pour. This moment feels almost like a pause in the relentless tide of rich meats and spiced wines, a chance to breathe, to listen, to take stock of the room around you. At the far end, near the musicians, a storyteller begins to speak. His voice is low at first, drawing the room closer, each phrase like a thread, pulling the listener toward the loom. He tells of a great hunt in the king's forest, of a stag, with antlers like the branches of an ancient oak, swift enough to outrun even the best hounds. His tale winds through brambles and streams, over hills and through moonlit glades, until at last the beast is cornered, but not before it speaks in a human tongue, offering the hunter a riddle in exchange for its life. The hall leans forward as one hanging on the final twist, and when it comes, clever, unexpected applause bursts forth like the breaking of a dam. The applause fades into the soft rustle of more dishes, arriving small pasties filled with minced pork, and raisins, their crusts crisp and buttery. Skewers of roasted pigeon glazed with honey. Bowls of green salad dressed with verjuice and oil. The fresh leaves are a welcome contrast to the richness that has come before, though you suspect most guests consider them little more than a garnish. Still, you eat them gladly, the sharpness cutting through the lingering heaviness on your tongue. Beneath the table, the dogs have grown bolder. One rests its head on your knee, watching each bite you take with solemn, unblinking eyes. Another noses at your boots until you pass down a bit of crust. This earns you a grateful thump of the tail and the sudden approving glance of the hound's master at the far end. It seems kindness to animals carries social weight here. The herald steps forward again, this time announcing not a dish, but a contest. A great wooden board is set up at one end of the hall, marked with painted rings. From a velvet-lined case, the steward produces darts of polished wood tipped with steel. Several knights step forward to try their hand, the crowd cheering each throw. Some darts land with satisfying thunks near the center. Others skitter off to the side amid groans and laughter. Even the jester takes a turn, pretending to miss wildly before landing a perfect shot with an exaggerated bow. Between the cheers, the feast flows on slabs of roast mutton fragrant with rosemary loaves of dark rye bread, still warm from the oven bowls of thick butter. A pot of mustard sharp enough to clear the nose makes its rounds. You smear a generous dollop on your meat and feel the sting rush through your sinuses. Around you, the pace of eating has slowed, but the drinking has not. The laughter grows louder, the gestures broader as wine loosens tongues and blurs the edges of courtly restraint. The Lord himself rises, lifting his cup. A hush spreads like a ripple from the high table to the farthest bench. He speaks a few words in praise of his guests, of the harvest of the peace that has allowed such bounty. His voice carries easily in the vaulted hall, practiced and resonant. The toast that follows is hearty and prolonged, the clink of cups like distant bells. You drink deeply, the spiced wine blooming warm in your chest. Outside the narrow windows, the night is thick and black, the torches in the courtyard casting halos of orange against the damp stone. You can hear the wind now faint through the thick walls, but inside the feast goes on cocooned in heat and sound. You realize you have lost all sense of the hour. The night could be young or nearly spent time here bends around the rhythms of the meal, the music, the company. The herald's trumpet sounds once more. This you sense is the signal for something exceptional, perhaps the final great course before the slow winding down begins. Guests straighten on their benches, servants gather at the kitchen door, and the air hums with the anticipation of another marvel. The kitchen doors swing wide, and a wave of heat spills into the hall, carrying with it the scent of something sweet and rich. Servants emerge in a practiced procession, each bearing part of a grand spectacle. At their head comes a confection so elaborate, it seems impossible, a towering almond cake, its many tiers frosted in a smooth glaze of sugar and decorated with candied violets, gold leaf, and tiny sculpted marzipan animals. It rises like a miniature fortress, each layer a battlement, each flower placed with painstaking care. The entire thing gleams in the flicker of torch and candlelight, an edible monument to the wealth and artistry of the Lord's kitchen. The cake is set reverently on a long sideboard where the steward will carve it into neat slices for the guests. But before anyone tastes it, the the procession continues, great platters of sugared fruits, apples, pears, and quinces, dipped in honey until their skins shine like polished glass. Bowls of cherries preserved in syrup, their deep crimson a jewel-toned promise, and small dishes of spiced nuts roasted until they crackle between the teeth. These are luxuries that speak not of survival, but of indulgence. From behind the dessert course comes a subtler wonder, small delicate wafers served warm from the griddle rolled into slender spirals and dusted with cinnamon. They are passed hand to hand, melting almost the moment they touch your tongue. After the density of meats and pies, they feel impossibly light, like a whispered note at the end of a long song. The minstrels change their tune, striking up something lilting and playful, as though to remind the hall that the feast is not yet over. A young page darts between the tables with a flagon of Hippocras, the spiced wine reserved for the closing stages of a banquet. It is sweeter than the earlier cups, laced with ginger cloves, and perhaps a touch of rosewater. You take a sip, and it blooms across your palate like fire and honey combined. At the high table, the Lord's eldest son leans back, cradling his cup as he tells a hunting story to a cluster of guests. His gestures grow larger, with each sentence his voice carrying down the length of the hall. A lady beside him laughs behind her hand, her eyes glittering in the torchlight. Across the way, two merchants haggle quietly over the future price of wool, their heads bent together like conspirators despite the music and laughter all around them. The carver begins to serve the almond cake, each slice placed on a small silver plate. When yours arrives, the texture is dense but tender, rich, with the buttery almond and the faint crunch of sugar at its edges. The marzipan animals are as sweet as they look, though almost too beautiful to eat. Almost. You take a bite, and the taste is so decadent, you can feel the years of labor behind every imported almond, every painstaking hour of preparation. Meanwhile, the sugared fruits are passed down their syrup, clinging to your fingers. You lick them clean without shame. There is no courtly rule here against savoring something so plainly meant to be eaten with delight. The roasted nuts follow their warmth, still trapped within their shells, the crack of each bite punctuating the hum of voices around you. In the center of the hall, the dancers return this time with ribbons trailing from their hands. They weave in and out between one another, the ribbons crossing and uncrossing, in a hypnotic pattern, the movement so fluid it seems almost rehearsed with the music itself. The rhythm grows more insistent, and some of the younger guests rise from the benches to join in their laughter, pealing against the stone like silver bells. The herald steps forward to announce a game, a riddle contest. The jester takes the floor, bowing extravagantly, before posing the first challenge, a question wrapped in wordplay and misdirection. The guesses fly fast, some clever, some absurd, each greeted with cheers or groans. When at last the answer is revealed, the room erupts in applause, and another guest takes a turn to pose their own riddle. This too is part of the feast, not just the food, but the shared wit, the exchange of cleverness and laughter that binds the company together. All the while, the servants keep moving, refilling cups, sweeping away bones, replacing soiled trenchers with clean ones. Their pace never falters, though their faces shine with sweat in the heat of the hall. You catch the eye of one as she sets down a fresh cup for you, and she offers the faintest smile before hurrying on. The hall itself seems to lean into the evening now. The shadows deeper, the gold of the tapestries richer in the flicker of the flames. The air is thick with the mingled scents of spiced wine, candle wax, roasted meats, and sweet syrup. Somewhere near the kitchen, you hear a burst of laughter from the servants' quarters, a reminder that even beyond the splendor here, life goes on in its many layers. As the riddle game continues, another subtlety is brought forth: a sugar swan floating on a mirrored platter of polished tin. It glows in the light, its wings arched as though caught mid-flight. A murmur of appreciation runs through the guests, for even after hours of marvels, the artistry of sugar can still draw awe. This too will be broken apart for eating, though slowly, reluctantly, as though it might dissolve if handled too roughly. By now, the Hippocras has warmed you through softening the edges of the night. You feel an easy contentment settling in, a sense that you could sit here for hours, yet watching the dancers weave their ribbons, listening to the playful rise and fall of riddles, tasting sweetness between sips of wine. The outside world has receded entirely. There is only the hall, the feast, and the unhurried turning of the night. And then, just as you begin to think the evening might drift forever in this golden rhythm, the herald's trumpet sounds again, this time with a flourish that promises a grand finale. All eyes turn toward the kitchen doors, the air charged with curiosity. What could possibly top the wonders already seen tonight? The kitchen doors open once more, and what emerges makes even the most seasoned guests lean forward in wonder. 4 servants step carefully into the hall, supporting a long wooden board, upon which rests the evening's crowning glory. A massive roast venison haunch glistening under a lacquer of spiced honey glaze. Sprigs of juniper and bay are tucked decoratively along its length, their fragrance mingling with the heady scent of the meat. The haunch is so large it must have come from a stag of exceptional size, a prize from the Lord's own hunting grounds. Beside the venison marches another pair of servants carrying a deep, steaming cauldron of gravy thickened with wine and studded with mushrooms and wild herbs. The scent of it alone makes conversation falter, as heads turn to follow its progress toward the high table. Behind them come more attendants with great wheels of coarse rye bread freshly split to reveal the steam trapped within. It is the kind of bread that can stand up to the richest meats, dense and hearty, with a crust that crackles under the knife. The carver approaches the venison with a blade that glints like a drawn sword. With long, precise strokes, he slices through the outer crust to reveal tender, rosy meat within. Each slice is laid reverently onto trenchers, then anointed with a ladleful of the rich gravy. When your turn comes, the weight of the meat in your hand tells you that this is no dainty portion, this is a feast, and the venison is meant to be eaten heartily. You take your first bite, and the flavors bloom: the deep, almost sweet richness of the meat, the herbal sharpness of juniper, the mellow bass notes of slow-roasted garlic. It is warm, grounding, and altogether satisfying. Around you, the guests respond with enthusiasm. Cups are lifted, the Lord's name called out in toasts of appreciation. The sound swells until it fills the hall, a roar of approval that the musicians match with a lively tune. The jester, never one to miss a moment, leaps atop a bench and pretends to carve invisible slices from the air, distributing them to imaginary guests with exaggerated bows. Laughter follows him down the length of the table. Servants circulate with bowls of accompaniments, stewed apples spiced with cinnamon, their softness a bright contrast to the venison's chew. Boiled turnips glazed with butter. Small onions roasted until they collapse into sweet golden strands. The balance of flavors is deliberate, a meal designed to keep the palate engaged long after the initial bite. You take a little of everything, finding that the apples in particular seem to draw out the meat's savory depth. Further down the hall, you catch sight of a minor squabble, two guests disputing whether the venison was taken by hounds or by bow. Their argument is good-natured, but spirited with hand gestures that come perilously close to upsetting cups and trenchers. Before long, a wager is struck to be settled tomorrow in the hunting yard. This is how stories and rivalries are born in such a place. The venison is followed closely by another marvel, a pie baked in a crust so tall and domed it could hide a helmet. The steward cracks it open with a flourish, and out pour the scents of spiced pigeon and beef marrow mingled with raisins and prunes. The filling glistens in the firelight, the steam curling into the air like a beckoning hand. Each slice reveals tender meat bathed in its own juices, the pastry flaking in golden shards. It is a dish meant for the deep of winter, rich enough to fend off the chill for hours. The minstrels, perhaps emboldened by the feasting, strike up a brisk melody, their fingers dancing over strings and pipes. A few guests rise to stamp in time with the rhythm, their boots thudding against the rushes. The dancers from earlier reappear, whirling between the tables, skirts and sleeves spinning out in bright arcs of fabric. In this moment, the hall feels almost airborne, lifted by its own joy. Between bites, you glance toward the high table. The Lord is speaking with a visiting knight, whose armor gleams even in the dim light. Their heads are bent close together, voices low enough to be drowned by the music. Whatever they discuss seems weighty land, perhaps, or a proposed alliance. Even at the height of revelry, the feast remains a stage for such quiet negotiations. Your trencher is now slick with juices, the bread beneath softened into a savory sponge. You tear off a corner and eat it, savoring the mingled flavors. Around you, others are doing the same, knowing that once the meat is gone, the trencher itself becomes a prize. Another cup of hippocras makes its way into your hand, the spiced sweetness lifting the heaviness of the meal. The heat of it warms your throat, your chest, your very bones. You lean back, letting the sounds of the hall wash over you. The rise and fall of conversation, the clink of knives against wooden plates, the occasional bark of a hound hoping for a morsel. The smell of venison still hangs in the air, underpinned by the softer scents of bread, apples, and spice. The jester returns to the floor this time with a mock sword fight against one of the acrobats. They duel in exaggerated lunges and parries, the jester stumbling dramatically before recovering with a triumphant thrust. The crowd roars approval coins, clinking onto the rushes as tokens of appreciation. It is as much a performance for the guests as for the Lord, who watches with an indulgent smile. As the last slices of venison are served, the pace of the hall slows slightly. The great dish has been shared, the bellies of the guests are full, and the air hums with the quiet satisfaction of abundance. But there is still more to come, for no feast ends abruptly. The servants begin to clear the remnants of the main course, making way for the next surprise, something lighter perhaps, or another dazzling subtlety to mark the evening's gradual descent toward its close. You sense the shift, the long crest of the feast, beginning its slow, measured fall. Yet even in this easing, the promise of wonder lingers. Another trumpet call will come soon, and with it a fresh turn in the night's unfolding tale. The herald's trumpet sounds again, not the brassy, jubilant call of earlier, but a gentler flourish that seems to signal refinement rather than grandeur. The kitchen doors part, and a line of servants emerges bearing smaller, more delicate dishes, the feast's equivalent of a sigh after the storm. At the front comes a broad silver platter of baked salmon, the skin glistening and curling at the edges, its surface scattered with chopped parsley and thin slices of lemon. The scent of the fish is clean and briny, softened by a glaze of butter and herbs. Following close behind are shallow bowls filled with pottage of peas and mint, the green bright against the rich browns and golds that have dominated the table all evening. There is also a dish of stewed mushrooms in cream, their earthy perfume rising like a whisper through the warmer smells of the hall. Servants set these along the tables with a practiced touch, placing them so that no guest is too far from one or the other. Your trencher is replaced yet again, fresh bread cool against your fingers. Onto it goes a portion of salmon, the flesh so tender it flakes at the slightest touch of your knife. You taste it, and the lightness is almost startling after the deep richness of venison and pigeon pie. The lemon's bright tang sharpens the flavor, clearing the palate in a way that makes you realize how much the night has already given you. The minstrels match the mood with a softer air. The lute's strings plucked in slow, measured notes, the recorder's breathy tones weaving around them. Conversation falls into a gentler rhythm. Voices, low gestures, smaller. The air feels calmer now, as though the feast has found its second wind in repose. Across from you, a young squire speaks animatedly to an older knight, his hands describing the arc of a sword stroke. The knight listens with the indulgence of one who has seen many such hopefuls, offering a few words that seem to both encourage and instruct. Farther down the table, two merchants trade news of ships and cargoes, their voices just above a murmur punctuated by sips of wine. A new dish arrives, small tarts filled with soft cheese and fresh herbs, their crusts thin and crisp. The cheese melts on your tongue, the parsley and thyme giving it a brightness that reminds you faintly of summer gardens. Alongside these are bowls of pickled vegetables, onions, carrots, and cabbage served not merely for taste, but for the way they cut through the lingering heaviness of the evening's earlier fare. The jester appears again, this time with a lute in hand. He strums a few off-key notes, then breaks into a song so ridiculous that even the minstrels pause to listen. His verses poke gentle fun at the Lord Steward, at the hunting boasts heard earlier, and even at the guests themselves, though always with enough charm to make the targets laugh along. Between verses, he plucks at the strings, as if attempting to tune them, only to twist them further out of key. The laughter that follows is warm and unforced, the kind that comes easily in the late hours of a feast. By now, the hall has grown more intimate. The torches burn lower, the candles casting longer shadows on the walls. The carved beasts and vines overhead seem to lean closer, their features softened in the flickering light. You notice the sound of the wind more distinctly now. A low moan through the narrow windows. A reminder that beyond these walls lies a night as cold and dark as the feast is warm and bright. Servants pass through once more, offering refills of hippocress or mead to those who wish it. You take a cup of mead this time, the honeyed sweetness a gentle counterpoint to the sharper spices of the earlier wine. It settles warmly in your chest, loosening the knots in your shoulders. The pace of the evening has shifted into something you could linger in indefinitely. In the center of the hall, the dancers return, but now their movements are slow and deliberate, hands and eyes meeting in graceful patterns. The music is softer still, the kind that seems to draw the very air into its rhythm. Some guests watch with quiet appreciation. Others turn back to their cups and their conversations, content to let the performance drift around them like a pleasant dream. Another dish is brought forth, a custard baked in a shallow dish, its surface just touched with nutmeg. The texture is smooth, the flavor mild and sweet. A final reminder that the feast still has wonders to share before it ends. You savor it slowly, each spoonful another small comfort in the gathering quiet of the night. And then comes a subtle but unmistakable change. The servants begin to move with less urgency, their faces easier, their steps unhurried. The herald no longer stands poised for constant announcements. The feast is entering its last hour, the long arc of the evening bending toward its close. Yet there is no sense of loss here, only the deep contentment of those who have eaten and drunk well, who have shared stories, laughter, and music, in a place made safe by the glow of fire and the bonds of fellowship. Somewhere near the high table, the Lord speaks again, this time not to command, but to thank. His words carry easily across the hall, gratitude for his guests, for the harvest, for the loyalty that has filled his hall tonight. There is a final toast, and cups are raised high once more, the amber and ruby drinks catching the candlelight like stained glass. In this moment you understand the heart of a medieval feast. It is not merely a display of wealth, nor a contest of dishes and delicacies. It is a gathering, a weaving together of lives and fortunes under one roof, a shared memory that will live in the telling long after the candles have burned low. And as the music swells for perhaps the last time tonight, you know the feast still has one or two more surprises before the embers in the hearth are left to glow in silence. The final surprises of the evening begin not with a trumpet, but with the soft clatter of wooden bowls being set upon the tables. From the kitchen come dishes that feel almost humble after the peacocks and venison haunches, stewed pears in red wine, their skins the deep purple of twilight. Small honey cakes pressed into the shapes of flowers, and a scattering of candied almonds glistening like tiny jewels. These are not meant to overwhelm, but to leave a sweet impression, a last lingering taste before the night slips away. You reach for a pear, its flesh tender enough to give way under the lightest pressure of your spoon. The wine in which it was stewed has stained it all the way through, carrying with it the warmth of cinnamon and clove. You take a bite, and it melts on your tongue, releasing its spices like a whispered benediction. Beside it, the honey cake is dense and fragrant, sticky with the comb's own perfume. You break it in half, feeling the faint resistance of the crust before the softness within yields. Conversation now has the easy rhythm of those who know the night is drawing to a close but are not quite ready to let it go. At your left, an older woman tells a younger companion about a feast she attended as a child, in the days when the hall's tapestries were newly hung. Her voice carries the weight of both memory and pride, as though by sharing it, she ensures the story will be remembered beyond her own life. The jester, sensing the softened mood, leaves off his louder antics and begins a quiet sort of entertainment, sleight of hand tricks with cups and pebbles, small riddles spoken in low tones to those nearest. His laughter is still quick, but it now holds a gentleness, as if even he understands that the time for riotous noise has passed. The minstrels follow suit, trading their brisk reels for slow airs, the kind that curl around the rafters like wood smoke. Another dish arrives, spiced milk, warmed in small pewter mugs. Its surface is dusted with nutmeg, and the steam that rises is soft with sweetness. You wrap your hands around the mug, feeling the heat seep into your palms, and sip carefully. The milk coats your tongue with a creamy richness, that carries you back in some half-forgotten way to a simpler time before courts and heraldry and the weight of all these grand rituals. Some guests push back their benches to stand and stretch, exchanging quiet farewells with those they will not see again for months, perhaps years. Others lean closer over their cups, determined to wring a few more minutes of talk from the dying light of the evening. In one corner, a group of squires plays at dice, their laughter low and companionable, no longer striving for attention. The Lord himself rises once more, though now there is no formal speech. Instead, he walks slowly along the high table, pausing to clasp the hands of his most honored guests. At each pause, he speaks briefly, his words private, his tone warm. It is a subtle gesture, but one that reinforces the bonds forged tonight over food, drink, and shared mirth. Servants, too, begin to shift their work toward closure, clearing the more elaborate dishes, stacking trenchers for removal, sweeping aside the most crowded clusters of rushes where crumbs have collected. The hounds, sensing the end, make one last hopeful pass beneath the benches, noses working overtime for a final scrap or two. A lucky few find them in the form of a crust of bread or a morsel of meat flicked discreetly from a guest's hand. In the softening air, a final subtlety is brought forth, a small sugar sculpture of the Lord's own crest, a lion, rampant paws raised high, standing upon a base of sugared almond paste. It is smaller than the earlier wonders, yet in some ways more personal. The guests murmur their approval for it as a fitting end to a night that has balanced magnificence with intimacy. The crest is admired for a while, then broken apart to be shared among those nearest. You taste a fragment and find it almost unbearably sweet, the sugar sharp and bright against the milder almond beneath. The minstrels begin one last song, a parting air both wistful and warm. It weaves through the hall, wrapping the final moments in a gentle thread of melody. Even those who have been deep in conversation fall quiet to listen. Some hum along under their breath. Others simply close their eyes and let the tune carry them. Your cup is filled once more, though only half this time. The hippocras has cooled its spices softer now, and you drink it slowly, matching your pace to the fading life of the hall. Around you, the glow of the fire seems richer, the shadows longer, and the knowledge that you have been part of something singular, something worth remembering, settles over you like a cloak. Outside, the wind presses against the castle walls, testing their strength. Inside, the feast holds the last of its warmth, the laughter lingering like the aftertaste of honey and wine. Soon the great hall will empty, the torches will sputter out, and the only sound will be the slow settling of embers in the hearth. But for now, you are still here in the waning heart of a medieval night, with one final chapter yet to unfold. The herald does not sound his trumpet now. Instead, the signal for the next course is quieter, the muffled roll of a small drum somewhere near the kitchen door. It draws only a few curious glances at first, but then the doors open again, and the servants step forward, carrying bowls and baskets that seem to glow in the candlelight. They bring roasted chestnuts still from palm in their shells, the faint char scent curling upward like wood smoke from a hearth. The aroma reaches you before the bowls do, pulling you toward them, with the promise of something both humble and perfect. You take a small handful, feeling the heat seep into your palm. With a twist of your fingers, the shell cracks, revealing the golden kernel inside. The first bite is soft, earthy, and just sweet enough to make you pause. Around you, others work through their own chestnuts, some deftly, others awkwardly laughing, as shells spring loose and skitter across the table. This is a different sort of sharing, no carving knives, no silver platters. Just warm food passed from hand to hand, a simple pleasure even in the grandeur of the feast's final hours. Following the chestnuts come small rounds of rye bread spread thick with fresh butter, their tops sprinkled lightly with coarse salt. Alongside them, platters of smoked fish, perhaps herring or trout, rest on beds of dill and lemon peel. The smoke scent is gentle, almost shy beneath the richer aromas still clinging to the hall. You take a piece, and the first taste is a whisper of the sea carried inland, balanced by the mellow sweetness of the bread beneath. The conversation now is threaded with goodbyes. Guests lean across the table to clasp hands to offer a final word or promise. Some speak of meeting again in a season's time, others simply nod, with the quiet understanding that life may carry them to separate paths before the next feast is called. A lady to your right gives you a smile that feels warmer than the hearth fire and says she hopes to see you at the midsummer celebrations, an invitation you accept with a bow. The jester, clearly aware of the tender quiet settling over the hall, approaches the high table with a final act. He produces a small, tattered pouch and pours its contents onto the table, a handful of brightly painted wooden balls. With practiced ease, he begins to juggle his movements, smooth, almost hypnotic in their rhythm. The balls weave arcs through the air, catching the light as they rise and fall. His expression is softer now, less for show, more for the sheer pleasure of motion. When he catches them all in one hand and bows, the applause that follows is genuine but gentle, fitting the mood. The musicians begin what will be their last set of the night. The tune is slow, with a rolling cadence that seems to draw the edges of the hall inward. It's the kind of melody that makes you aware of your own breathing, that laces the space between the notes with memory. You find yourself thinking not just of tonight's marvels, the peacock, the venison, the subtleties of sugar and spice, but of the lives and hands behind them, the huntsmen in the forests, the sailors who braved rough seas for cinnamon and nutmeg, the kitchen workers sweating over open fires for hours uncounted. Servants make another quiet circuit this time, offering cups of a pale, gently bitter herbal infusion meant to settle the stomach after such abundance. You accept one, the warmth seeping into your hands, the steam carrying the grassy scent of mint and chamomile. The first sip is a reminder that this is not just a meal, but a carefully plotted journey from the heaviest roasts to the softest sweetness, from the riot of noise to the measured exhale of the night. The high table begins to empty now. The Lord's family rises first, each offering bows and farewells as they pass down the hall. The guests stand in respect, the murmured blessings and thanks rippling outward as the family departs toward the private chambers beyond the great doors. Their departure marks the true beginning of the end. The feast is no longer the business of the entire hall, but of those who will linger for the comfort of the embers and the last cups of drink. One final dish is placed before you, a slender slice of quince paste, its ruby translucence glimmering in the light, served alongside a small wedge of hard nutty cheese. The flavors, sharp, sweet, and faintly floral, make for a delicate parting note. You savor it slowly, letting each bite dissolve before taking the next. The chestnuts are nearly gone now, the baskets holding only a few cracked shells. The rushes underfoot are scattered with crumbs, and the occasional glint of a dropped coin. A servant sweeps gently near your feet, not to drive you away, but to begin the long work of restoring the hall to its daytime order. The great fire still roars, but its heart is all glowing coal, now the flames dancing lower with each minute. In the corner, a pair of guests sing softly, the melody too low for you to make out the words, but sweet enough to keep you listening. It blends with the clink of cups, the murmur of private jokes, the creak of benches shifting under tired bodies. The feast has softened into something almost domestic, a quiet hearth, gathering just larger, grander, and wrapped in stone and history. You take another sip of your herbal drink, feeling the day settle heavily in your bones. The hall will not hold you much longer. Soon you will rise, step back into the cold night, and carry the warmth of this place with you like a hidden ember. But for now, you sit a moment longer, letting the music, the light, and the slow rhythm of the feast's final moments wrap around you like a heavy, well-loved cloak. The hall is quieter now, the riotous laughter of earlier hours replaced by the steady murmur of low voices and the occasional burst of a softer laugh. It feels as if the very stones of the walls are breathing slower, as though the castle itself knows the feast is winding down. The air is cooler too, the great fire settling into its deep bed of embers, sending out waves of gentle heat that fade before they reach the farthest benches. From the kitchen, there comes no parade of servants, this time only a few moving quietly, carrying trays of what might be called the feast's afterthoughts. They set down small bowls of dried fruits, figs, dark as midnight dates, sticky with syrup raisins, with the faintest bloom of sugar on their skins. There are walnuts still in their shells, piled high in shallow baskets, with small wooden mallets passed around to crack them. The soft crack of shell against table punctuates the low hum of conversation. You take a fig, tearing it open to reveal the tiny seeds inside each, catching the candlelight like flecks of gold. The sweetness is deep and almost wine-like, a flavor that lingers long after you've swallowed. The walnuts are drier, earthier, a grounding counterpoint to the fruit. Together they form a pairing older than the hall itself, a reminder that the simplest foods can still carry the weight of centuries. A servant refills your cup, not with hippocras or mead this time, but with a clear, slightly tart cider. Its freshness is a welcome contrast to the dense sweetness of the fruit, and it leaves your mouth clean, ready for another bite. Around you, guests seem content to eat slowly, as though they are storing these flavors as memories rather than meals. The minstrels remain in their corner, the music now a threadbare thing, single-plucked notes from a lute, the faint hum of a bow on strings. The jester is nowhere to be seen, perhaps already slipping away toward his own rest. In his place, a group of young squires has gathered at the center of the hall to play at mock sword drills, their wooden practice blades tapping lightly as they fence in slow motion. The older guests watch with fond amusement, offering occasional pointers or jeers. Near the high table, a merchant unrolls a small bolt of cloth for a noblewoman to inspect, deep green wool finely woven with a border of intricate embroidery. They speak in hushed tones, perhaps sealing a quiet trade before the night fully ends. Elsewhere, a visiting knight recounts the details of a skirmish from months past, his voice low, but carrying the practiced cadence of one used to telling stories around a campfire. Another small plate is placed before you, a thin slice of bread spread with a paste of ground almonds and honey, dusted with a whisper of cinnamon. It is both sweet and savory, light enough to feel like a closing note rather than another course. You take your time with it, breaking off small pieces, savoring each one as the cinnamon's warmth fades slowly from your tongue. The Lord himself has moved from the high table to mingle among the remaining guests. His pace is unhurried, his manner relaxed, the careful mask of formality from earlier in the evening replaced with something closer to genuine ease. He clasps shoulders, shares brief words, and in one case kneels slightly to listen to a tale told by an elderly retainer. These are the gestures of a host, ensuring that the night ends well for all who came. Servants begin their slow work of dismantling the feast. The great salt cellar at the head of the table is removed. The tapestries are left hanging, but the torches are allowed to gutter lower. Wooden cups and knives are gathered in neat bundles, trenchers stacked into tall, uneven towers to be carried back to the scullery. The rushes underfoot are beginning to look trampled, their fragrant herbs crushed and mingled with crumbs, bones, and stray feathers from earlier dishes. A few guests drift toward the hearth, drawn by the deeper heat there. Some stand cups in hand, watching the fire's slow shift from flame to ember. Others sit close boots, stretched toward the warmth, speaking in low tones that don't rise above the crackle of the wood. You join them for a moment, feeling the warmth seep into your shins, the light flickering across your face. The cider is finished, replaced with a final offer of water from a clay jug. It's cool and clean, and you drink it gratefully, feeling the clarity it brings after so much richness. It is the last kindness of the table, the signal that the night's abundance has given all it can. In one corner, a boy no older than 12 begins to sweep the edges of the hall, working quietly so as not to disturb the remaining company. His broom makes a soft, rasping sound against the flagstones, a reminder that even this night, so full of spectacle and flavor, must end in simple work. And yet there is no sadness in this closing hour. Only the quiet satisfaction of having been part of something whole, a gathering of people, food, music, and light against the long, dark outside. The memory of it will sit warm in your bones long after you've left these walls. The air in the hall now carries a faint coolness drifting in from the narrow windows high in the stone walls. The heat from the day's roaring hearth has sunk into the flagstones and heavy timbers, but the outer chill is beginning to reclaim the edges of the space. You draw your cloak tighter around your shoulders, leaning into the last comforts of the feast. From the kitchen, there is no longer the bustling clatter of pans and knives, only the occasional muffled thump as a barrel is rolled away or a heavy door is shut. The cooks have retreated to their own quarters or begun the long task of scrubbing the soot and grease from their domain. In the hall, the servants who remain move more slowly, now stopping here and there to exchange a few quiet words with one another, no longer bound to the urgent pace of earlier hours. The remaining guests are gathered in smaller knots. Near the far wall, a group of older men sit with their cups recounting tales that wander from truth into legend and back again. The details shift with every retelling. A hunted bear grows larger. A winter storm becomes more deadly. A rival knight gains or loses an improbable number of victories. The laughter that follows each exaggeration is warm but subdued, rolling low through the air like distant thunder. In another corner, two women share a length of embroidery, passing it back and forth as they examine the stitches. The scene they discuss, a battle from years ago, is rendered in tiny, precise threads, each figure in its place beneath banners and bright pennons. They speak softly, their voices rising only when they come to a figure they recognize from the real event. A servant approaches your place with a small tray holding what may be the final offering of the night-thin biscuits of oat and honey, crisp and delicate, served alongside a small wedge of sharp, aged cheese. The contrast is striking, the cheese salty and tangy, the biscuit sweet and light. You take them together, savoring how they balance one another, and realize they feel like a parting gift rather than a course. The musicians have dwindled to a single player now, an older man with a bowed vielle cradled under his chin. His music is slow and winding, almost like a lullaby, the kind of tune that slips into the bones and quiets restless thoughts. It is the sort of playing that could carry you into sleep if you let it, your mind drifting to the rhythm of bow and string. From where you sit, you can see the high table more clearly than at any point earlier in the night. The Lord's chair with its carved crest and worn armrests is empty now, the seat turned slightly, as though it had been vacated only moments ago. The tapestries behind it, their colors muted in the dimming light, seem to lean forward in the stillness, like listeners left without a speaker. A low murmur at your side draws your attention, a pair of guests discussing the long journey home they face in the morning. One will ride north along the coast, the other south through the hills. Their talk turns to weather, to the state of the roads, to the inns and villages they might stop at along the way. It's a reminder that for many this night is not an ending, but a pause before the miles resume. The servant who poured your cider earlier now carries a small pitcher of warm spiced ale. She stops at each table, offering it with a tired but genuine smile. When she reaches you, the heat from the pewter cup seeps into your fingers, and the scent of nutmeg and roasted barley rises into the air. You sip slowly, letting the warmth carry through you, the faint bitterness, a pleasant counterweight to the sweetness of the evening's earlier cups. The hounds, too, seem to understand the night is ending. They curl near the hearth, noses tucked beneath their tails, paws twitching occasionally in some private dream. A younger pup pads hesitantly toward your table, drawn perhaps by the scent of the biscuit still in your hand. You break off a small piece and offer it, earning a grateful thump of the tail, before the dog slinks back to its place among the others. The fire in the great hearth has sunk lower still, its flames now no more than a scatter of orange among the coals. Shadows gather thickly in the far corners of the hall, and the golden glow of candlelight is beginning to sputter as each wick burns toward its end. Somewhere above in the darkness beyond the beams, you hear the faint rustle of the night wind pressing against the roof, as though impatient for the last of the revelers to leave. And yet no one is hurried. The pace of departure is unspoken and organic, each guest rising when their own sense of the night's ending overtakes them. You are not quite ready yet, content to linger in the softened air to sip the last of your ale and listen to the quiet music weave its way through the bones of the hall. It is in these final moments that the true nature of the feast reveals itself, not in the grand displays or the marvels of sugar and spice, but in the way strangers have become familiar company, in the ease of shared stories, in the warmth of the hall, holding back the cold outside for just a little longer. The hall seems to exhale the long breath of a place that has held too much warmth, light, and sound for too many hours. What was once a roar of voices is now no more than a scattering of soft conversations, and even those are broken by long pauses in which no one feels the need to speak. You become aware of the subtle sounds you had not noticed before, the faint ticking of cooling metal from the great chandeliers, the distant drip of melted snow from the eaves outside, the low pop of a stubborn coal refusing to die in the hearth. One by one, candles are snuffed out. The servants move like shadows, carrying small brass extinguishers from wick to wick. Each puff of smoke curls upward into the beams, leaving behind the faint scent of charred wax. The light fades unevenly, and with every candle quenched, the pockets of shadow grow, stretching across the rush-covered floor. The corners of the hall retreat into darkness, until only the central space anchored by the hearth remains clearly visible. A final tray of refreshment makes its way to the remaining guests. Small cups of warm, lightly sweetened wine infused with rosemary and sage. It's a drink meant not to invigorate, but to steady a bridge between the feast's bright chaos and the silence to come. You cradle your cup, breathing in the herbal steam before taking a sip. The taste is gentle, almost medicinal, but grounding in a way you didn't know you needed. Near the hearth, two young pages begin to fold the heavy woven tablecloths, their small hands disappearing beneath the fabric's weight. They work slowly, dragging each folded section toward the trestle's edge. Beneath the cloth, the wood is scarred from decades of meals and celebrations, its surface burnished to a dull glow by countless elbows and spilled cups. It is a reminder that these feasts are not rare, singular miracles, but part of a rhythm that the hall has kept for generations. The older guests seem reluctant to rise. Some lean back against the benches with half-lidded eyes caught between wakefulness and the first drift toward sleep. Others sit forward, elbows on the table, still engaged in low, lingering talks. No one hurries them. There is no need. Outside, the night stretches endlessly, and the journey home, whether a short walk across the courtyard or a ride through darkened fields, can wait until the last of the warmth is carried with them. Your gaze drifts upward to the carved beams, where creatures of wood griffins, hounds, and dragons peer down through the dim light. In the day's full glow, they seemed like guardians. Now they are dreamlike, half-merged with shadow, their expressions unreadable. You imagine the countless nights they have watched just like this, a hall shrinking into its own firelight, guests speaking softly under the slow collapse of the feast. At your table, a servant quietly gathers the remaining trenchers. The bread has grown stiff now, its juices absorbed hours ago, its surface cool. Some of it will go to the poor at the gate in the morning. Some will be tossed to the hounds before the doors are barred for the night. It is one of the small practical rituals that tether this great event to the workaday life outside its walls. The music has dwindled to silence. The vielle player from earlier sits now with his instrument laid across his knees, tracing the carved scroll at its top with a fingertip, as though considering whether one more tune might fit into the night. In the end, he only smiles faintly and begins to pack the bow and strings away in a soft cloth. The absence of music is striking, but it feels right, like the last echo fading after the final word of a story. The Lord reappears briefly at the edge of the high table, speaking with his steward in low tones. Their exchange is brisk but unhurried. Arrangements for the next day's duties, perhaps, or the settling of accounts for provisions spent on the feast. Once done, the Lord gives a single nod to the room at large, not a speech, not even a formal farewell, but enough to acknowledge those who still remain. A few rise to bow. Others simply return the gesture with quiet respect. The hounds shift in their sleep, a few stretching their legs toward the cooling hearth. The scent of them mixed with the fading aromas of meat bread and candle wax is warm and unmistakably alive. You realize how much they have been a part of the evening, moving unnoticed beneath the tables like a second current beneath the tide of the feast. Your cup is nearly empty now. You finish it in a single, unhurried swallow, letting the warmth settle low in your chest. Around you, the benches creak as more guests stand, cloaks are pulled close, and farewells are murmured. The sound of boots against the flagstones begins to join the fire's low crackle as a steady rhythm. Somewhere deep in the castle, you hear a door close softly. It's a sound that carries a strange finality, as though the building itself is beginning to fold in on the night, to tuck away its brightness, until the next time the great hall wakes to fire and feast. And though you know you too will soon rise for the moment, you linger still held by the soft weight of this final hour, reluctant to let it slip entirely into memory. The hall is breathing in silence now, the vast space holding its own quiet, as if reluctant to give you up to the night outside. Only a few pockets of sound remain, the faint scrape of benches being pushed back, the soft rumble of voices trading final words, the occasional sharp crack of a log in the hearth, surrendering to the coals. The servants are moving with a kind of graceful fatigue, the kind that comes when a long night's work nears its end. They carry pewter cups and wooden platters in stacks against their hips, stepping carefully between the few guests who still linger. From time to time, one stoops to pick up a fallen scrap of cloth or to shake out a corner of rushes into which crumbs have been swept. There is no bustle now, only the steady rhythm of things being put right. Near the high table, two retainers are methodically lowering the great salt cellar into its protective chest. Even this simple act seems ceremonial in the dim light. For the salt is a treasure both for the table and the Lord's status, and it is handled with deliberate care. They wrap it in linen before closing the lid. The faint sound of wood sliding against wood marking its rest until the next feast calls it forth. On the benches nearest the fire, a trio of older guests remains in quiet conversation, their faces ruddy from the wine and the heat. They speak of winters past and of lords long gone, tracing the hall's history as if turning the pages of a book written in stone and timber. One gestures toward the carved beam above the hearth, recounting the story of the stonemason who fell during its raising and how his family was given bread from the castle kitchens for a year. Their words are not hurried. They carry the slow dignity of things remembered well. A final tray passes your way, small clay cups filled with warm ale steeped with ginger. The servant offering them is young, barely more than a boy, and his tired smile is shy but genuine. You take one, cupping it between your hands. The ginger is sharp, cutting through the lingering heaviness of the evening's flavors, and you feel it clear your thoughts just enough to hold the night in sharper focus. From the shadows near the far wall, a low voice begins to hum. At first, it seems like a private tune meant for no one but the singer, but gradually it shapes itself into a melody that the others at his table recognize. They join in quietly, the voices weaving together in a simple song that has likely been sung here for generations. It is not a song of triumph or of courtly romance. It is a song of hearth and home, of long roads traveled, and the comfort of familiar walls. The sound fills the hall, without raising its volume, like warm water spreading into every corner. One by one, guests begin to rise in earnest now. Some bow toward the high table, even though it stands empty. Others clasp hands with those nearby, exchanging murmured blessings for health and safe travels. Cloaks are shaken out, hoods drawn up, gloves pulled over fingers stiffened by the night's chill. Boots strike the stone floor in uneven rhythms as small groups make for the great doors. The doorman, broad-shouldered and quiet, has been standing at his post since the feast began. Now he pushes the heavy oak doors open just enough to let each departing party through. A rush of cold night air spills in with every movement, curling around your ankles before the door closes again. Beyond is only darkness, thick, deep, and waiting. Those who remain draw closer to the hearth, not for warmth alone, but for the comfort of the circle it creates. The benches are pulled in tighter, the talk even softer now, as though those within are keeping the fire's glow alive through sheer presence. You find yourself caught in that glow, unwilling to step away just yet. A servant pauses beside you with a folded length of cloth, the table runner that once stretched down the center of your place. She lifts it with care, shaking away a few stray crumbs before tucking it under her arm. Her nod is almost imperceptible, but it feels like a silent acknowledgement that your part in the feast has been seen and that it has mattered. Your gingered ale is nearly gone, and the warmth it has left in your chest makes the surrounding air feel cooler by contrast. You set the empty cup on the edge of the table, hearing the soft thud as it meets the wood. The sound is small but final, like the closing of a page. Somewhere high in the beams, an owl calls faint but clear through the thick stone. The sound belongs entirely to the night outside, yet it slips easily into the hall's rhythm, as though it has been waiting for this moment, when voices are few, and the fire's crackle is the loudest thing here. You glance toward the great doors, but they remain closed, holding back that vast darkness for just a little longer. You know the moment is coming, when you will have to rise, gather your things, and step into that night. But for now, you sit letting the hall's last light cling to you. Every creak of timber and sigh of stone feels like part of a story. You are still inside of a story that will follow you even after the door closes behind you. The great hall feels smaller now, as if the walls have drawn inward with the guest's departure. Shadows cling thickly to the high rafters, and the tapestries, once alive with flickering light, now hang heavy and still. The scents of the feast have settled into a muted blend. The sweet tang of wine long since poured, the faint salt of roasted meat, the ghost of spices clinging to the air. Beneath it all lies the deeper, older smell of the hall itself, stone wood, and the faint musk of the hounds still curled by the hearth. A few final guests linger at the tables. They speak in the kind of low voice meant for confidences, leaning close, so that even in the near-empty room their words remain private. One gestures toward the far, as he talks, his hand casting brief shadows over the wall. Another listens without interrupting, nodding in the slow rhythm of someone weighing each detail. The servants have begun the last quiet rituals of the night. One carries away the final candlesticks from the side tables, their wax pooling at the base like frozen tears. Another moves through the hall with a long-handled brush, sweeping the trampled rushes into loose piles to be gathered later. Their movements are unhurried, their silence almost reverent. It is as though the hall itself is being put to bed. Near the hearth, a pair of hounds shifts in their sleep, one stretching with a groan before curling back into itself. The coals glow a steady low red now, their heat radiating only as far as the first circle of benches. Beyond that, the air is cool enough to raise gooseflesh along your arms if you drift too far from the fire. A young page enters with a wooden tray, not for serving now, but for collecting. He gathers the last forgotten cups, the stray knives left lying near the salt cellars. When he reaches your place, he offers a polite nod before lifting the small, empty dish still before you. The sound of the pewter sliding across the wood is soft but final. One of the older guests rises, pulling his cloak around him and fastening it at the throat with a silver clasp. He makes his way slowly toward the great doors, pausing once to rest a hand on the shoulder of a friend still seated. The farewell they exchange is wordless but full of meaning. A moment later, the doorman eases the heavy oak open just enough for the man to slip into the waiting dark. Cold air rushes in briefly, smelling of wet earth and distant smoke before the door closes again. At your side, a servant kneels to gather the trenchers from the floor where they were set aside earlier. Some are still faintly damp with the juices of the meal. Others have dried to a stiff crust. They will be sorted in the kitchens. Come morning, some to feed the poor at the gate, some to the hounds, the rest to be discarded. Even in this quiet moment, the cycle of the feast continues in its practical ways. From across the hall, a faint melody rises. It is not the work of the official musicians, they have long since put away their instruments, but of a single voice, low and untrained, humming a fragment of an old tune. The sound floats just above the crackle of the coals, filling the space between the last words spoken in the hall. You cannot place the song, but its rhythm feels older than the feast, older even than the hall. Your gaze drifts upward to the banners hanging above the high table. In the dimness, their colors have lost their brilliance, but their shapes remain a lion rampant, a stag leaping a field of stars stitched in faded gold. They have looked down on countless nights like this one, their cloth drinking in the smoke and the laughter and the songs, until they are thick with memory. Another guest departs, then another. Each time the great door opens, the cold pushes in just a little farther, testing the warmth still pooled around the hearth. Those who remain draw their cloaks tighter, some shifting closer to the fire in unconscious defense. You feel it too, that quiet urging from the night outside that the time to leave is drawing near. Yet no one moves with haste. The last moments of a feast are not for rushing. They are for holding on to the memory, for letting the weight of the evening settle fully into your bones, so that when you carry it away, it will not fade too quickly. You sip the final swallow of your drink and set the cup aside, listening as the fire hisses softly, one coal collapsing into another. A servant approaches to collect the cup. Her fingers brush the wood of the table with care, as though even now Wow feels the need to honor the space where you've sat. She carries it away without a word, leaving behind the faint scent of soap and clean linen as she passes. Somewhere in the far dark, you hear the faint scrape of a bolt being drawn on an outer door. The castle is closing itself for the night, sealing its warmth against the long hours until morning. And though you know your own leaving is near, you linger still unwilling to be the next shadow through the great doors. The hall now holds only a handful of figures, their shapes blurred by shadow and the dim flicker of the hearth. The vast space which only hours ago rang with trumpets and laughter feels almost private, like a secret chamber known only to those who stayed until the very end. The great tables, stripped of their finery, are bare wood once more, their surfaces catching just enough light to glimmer faintly where years of feasts have polished them smooth. The remaining guests speak little, and when they do, their voices are hushed, as if unwilling to disturb the quiet that has settled like a blanket over the hall. Even the servants tread lightly now, their footsteps soft in the rushes, their movements pared down to the essentials. A few carry bundles of soiled linens under their arms, the fabric hanging limp with the weight of the night's labor. The doorman stands watchful by the great doors, his broad frame outlined faintly in the torchlight from the passage beyond. Each time a guest rises, he shifts just enough to be ready, his large hands resting easily on the iron latch. One couple approaches cloaks already drawn tight, hoods pulled low. Their departure is a quiet one, a nod to the others, a brief glance toward the hearth, and then the slow swing of the oak door. Cold air slides in, wrapping around your ankles before retreating again as the door closes behind them. The hounds stir at the draft. One lifts its head, ears pricking toward the sound, before resettling with a sigh that is almost human. The smell of them, warm fir wood smoke, the faint tang of meat seems stronger now that the air is otherwise so still. A servant kneels by the hearth, using a long-handled iron to nudge the logs and coax a few last flames from the embers. The fire answers, reluctantly flaring just enough to throw a sudden wash of light across the benches nearest it. For a heartbeat, the whole scene sharpens the lines in the faces of those remaining. The carved ridges of the mantelpiece, the small drift of ash settling on the hearthstone. Then the light subsides again, leaving the hall in its gentler gloom. Another guest departs. This one pauses by the high table, laying a hand briefly on the arm of the Lord's empty chair, as though paying a final respect. No words are spoken, but the gesture carries its own weight. When the door closes behind him, the space feels fractionally quieter, the air a touch cooler. From the far end of the hall comes the faint rustle of fabric. Two servants are rolling the smaller side tables against the wall, their legs squealing softly against the stone. The noise is not unpleasant. It feels like the sound of the feast, folding itself away, ready to be unpacked again when the time comes. Your own place at the bench feels different now. The wood is cool beneath your hands, the scent of the meal gone from the air immediately around you. You can almost sense the hall's memory settling, pressing the night down into its deep store of past celebrations. The voices that remain seem distant, even though they are only a few steps away. The last trays of forgotten scraps are carried off toward the kitchens. Somewhere beyond the main doors, you hear the muffled bark of a dog in the courtyard. The sound reminds you of the cold, waiting outside the long walk through stone corridors before you reach your own warm bed. Yet still you linger as though there might be one more moment, one more breath of the feast to take in before it is gone entirely. A final pair of guests rises, their boots thudding softly as they make for the doors. They exchange brief farewells with those who remain, then disappear into the dark beyond the threshold. The great door shuts with a muted thump, and you realize there are now only three besides yourself in the vast hall: the doorman, a single servant folding the last of the linens, and one other guest seated close to the hearth. The servant gathers her bundle, nods to the doorman, and vanishes through a side passage. The last guest stirs, glances into the fire, and then begins the slow process of drawing on his gloves. It is not long before he too is gone, leaving you alone with the doorman and the quiet pulse of the embers. The doorman does not speak, but you sense his readiness, his patience in waiting for the final departure. The hall is no longer a place for feasting now. It has returned to its role as a sleeping giant holding its breath until it wakes again. The great hall is nearly empty now, its vastness magnified by the hush that fills it. The warmth that once roared from the hearth has dwindled to a deep glow, casting long, slow-moving shadows across the stone floor. You can hear the faint sigh of the wind pressing at the windows, high above the occasional groan of timber as the beams settle into the cold of the night. The doorman stands still as carved stone near the great oak doors, his presence both a sentinel and a silent reminder that the feast has reached its end. His eyes rest on you now, not in impatience, but in a quiet understanding. It is time. You rise slowly from the bench, the wood creaking under your weight. Your cloak hangs heavy on your shoulders, carrying with it the faint scent of the feast, spiced wine, roasted meat, and the smoke of the great fire. For a moment, you rest your hands on the table before you feeling the cool, bare grain beneath your palms. Hours ago, it was crowded with platters and cups, alive with voices. Now it is only wood again, stripped of all but memory. Your boots scuff softly against the rushes as you make your way toward the hearth one last time. You pause there, letting the fading heat wash over your shins, watching the embers pulse like the slow heartbeat of the hall. In that flicker, you catch the echo of the night's pageantry, the shimmering peacock, the towering subtleties of sugar, the laughter spilling like wine between courses. For a breath, it all feels close enough to touch again. A movement at your side draws your gaze. One of the hounds, roused from its doze, has padded over to nudge your hand with its head. You scratch behind its ear, feeling the warmth of its fur, and it leans briefly against your leg before returning to its place by the fire. It is a simple gesture, grounding you in the present, even as your mind lingers in the magic of what has passed. The doorman steps forward now, one broad hand on the iron latch. The heavy door swings open with a groan, and the night rushes in a crisp breath of damp air, carrying the scents of pine, wet stone, and far-off wood smoke. The cold curls around your ankles, urging you forward. You step across the threshold, and the air changes. Behind you, the hall still glows faintly, its light spilling in a golden arc onto the courtyard stones. The doorman waits until you are clear, then closes the door with a muted finality. The sound reverberates through the stone around you, a deep, gentle thud that feels like the last page turning in a long-told story. Above the sky is black and clear, the stars pricked bright as candle flame. Your breath rises in pale clouds before you. The silence out here is of a different kind, colder, larger, threaded with the distant rustle of trees and the low call of an owl. You pull your cloak tighter, feeling the night wrap around you. For a moment, you glance back at the shut door, knowing that behind it, the hall sleeps, now holding the memory of the feast in its timbers and stone. That memory is yours to carry, as well a warmth to be drawn upon in the darker days ahead. And so you turn toward the path that will take you to your bed. Each step crunches faintly in the frost that has settled over the courtyard. The castle's walls loom quiet above you, their battlements silvered by moonlight. The feast is over, but its echoes will linger soft, steady, and enduring long after you have left its light behind. The cold night air follows you even as you step into the smaller, warmer chambers of your own quarters. You set aside your cloak, feeling its weight slip from your shoulders, and the faint sense of the feast fade with it. In their place is the quiet comfort of stillness walls close enough to hold the heat, the faint glow of a single candle casting shadows that sway gently with the air. You lower yourself onto the bed, the heaviness of the day and night settling over you all at once. Beyond the window, the castle grounds sleep under a thin veil of frost. Somewhere in the darkness, the last embers in the great hall are sinking into ash, their glow hidden now from every eye. But the warmth of them lingers in the memory of the food and music, the company of strangers, turned companions, and the sense of being part of something larger than yourself. The feast is over, yet its rhythm still hums quietly in you. The laughter, the music, the clink of cups, they seem softer now, as though carried on a tide that is slowly drawing back into the night. You close your eyes and feel the echo of the hall's great heartbeat, steady and unhurried, carrying you toward rest. There is no rush. The castle sleeps, and you are part of its stillness now. The wind outside rattles faintly at the shutters, but it is no threat, only the night reminding you of the warmth you hold. You let your breathing slow, your thoughts loosen, until all that is left is the gentle glow of memory. And in that glow, the feast lives on,